Okay, so here we are. We're going to start the game, and we're going to do career mode for everybody that's watching this. Well, the object of today is going to be we're going to launch as many missions as we can, and the unique part about this is we're going to take it from a program slash project manager position or viewpoint. Unfortunately, the couple of the mods that KSP Kerbal Space Program uses we won't be able to use because that make it more realistic, because the realism factor seems to be missing. I did test it out and it took 30 years to do a single prop plane to build one, and it was just very weird, very awkward. I have to do a little bit more learning on that. But the base game, as you can see, we're in the Kerbal world, so we didn't do the Earth scenarios. Everything's going to be pretty basic, and I'm going to try to go through a little bit of the art, if you will, or the passion that I have in actually creating a space program in career mode. And we'll do each mission individually. The more complex missions will be a new episode. But in the first couple missions, this shouldn't take a lot of effort, if you will, as far as I have played this very, very much in the past. So I will explain through everything that I'm doing and hopefully enjoy and get something out of it. And again, from a project manager's perspective. So first, we're going to give this thing a name, and we're going to say it is the episode, we'll call it a series. Project Management Series. There we go. We got it on career. We're going to change our flag. There's a couple things we can choose here. I like the old flag of, let's see, did I download? No. A lot of companies here. We'll probably change flags per mission just to make it interesting. So we'll go with the minimalistic for now, and we'll accept it. All right, let's difficult, normal. We're not going to go anything too crazy. And we'll start that up, let it load, and hopefully I'll adjust the audio. We're going to focus on mouse with this. I got a couple mods. One of the things I will say is, and I'm going to turn down the audio. One of the things I will say is that the certain aspects to this are not going to be played out as much as they should, because, put simply, project management slash program management versus pilot and video game. I am not a pilot, so we're gonna do our best on those missions to see what they have. I do have MechJeb downloaded, which is a enhanced feature that will allow us to code in parameters for launches in certain sequences. So the game is fairly simple. Those of you who have played it, we have different areas of the Kerbal, or Cape Canaveral, if you will. We have the launch pad, we have the mission control, we have the space hangar. That's where we're going to create planes and horizontal launch vehicles, maybe helicopters, depending if I can install that mod properly. We have the vehicle assembly building, which is more of a vertical vehicle assembly. It's a rocket building. We have the tracking station, and I'm going to use a lot of shortcuts, so I'll try to explain them as I use them. One of them for apogee is, especially on some of the launches, you just hit M and to find out how fast you're going and where your apogee is. And of course, there's certain aspects to rocket thrust that we're going to have to use periodic shut off and turn on, and vary the, depending if it's a liquid fuel rocket, vary the fuel thrust from 0 to 100. this is where we'll basically be able to do a little bit of the manual calculations. Nothing here is going to be too involved. Until we get to the later missions, we're going to have to use the tracking station for intercept and to see what orbit we want to go in and what orbits our current satellites are flying around. So there's a little bit here as well. And then, of course, we have the research and development, which right now, this is an important aspect of the game. We have 0 science, so we're basically starting off on our mission. It reminds me of a lot of startups today that the consumer, or if you will, the commercial space programs of today, they're starting out with a good lead or a lot of good technology out there that was basic research and developed by NASA and other firms, not necessarily government firms. And this tree basically gives us that opportunity to be innovative and to allow ourselves to imagine which direction we want to go for more science, etc. Now remember, this is at the beginning of a space program, so we're not at 2021. We'd probably be more at like 1957, maybe 1963, somewhere in there in the actual calendar. So we don't have any science there. We have an astronaut complex where we can hire our astronauts, our pilots, our engineers, our scientists. Scientists are going to be very important for gathering research. You get a bonus when a scientist goes up on a launch. Pilots are great if you need to steer something, rocket or a plane, if you will. And engineers are great for working on stuff, so you get little bonuses there. As you can see, we have a budget, so we're going to try to adhere to the budget, and we're going to operate just like a normal space program, hopefully. Well, to a point. Obviously, this is a game. We have the administration building, and in the administration building, this is where we do different financing, science, and public relations and operations negotiations, is how I call it. And they're trade-offs. For example, if I research rights to sell out, these are the you're selling research to the commercial sector or the consumer sector, not unlike NASA did with a lot of the space technologies or that we use today. Microwaves, ballpoint pen came from this. And a lot of other things, communications, aspects of communications came from this. And they allow us to set our commitment. And as you set your commitment to it, you see that you're going to affect your funds and science. Now in this, they have a little asterisk here. You basically have 0 science, but you also have 0 effect on funds. It's a one-time effect strategy, and it doesn't remain active. So it's each individual technology that you discover. I probably won't do this just yet because I literally have none. But we might come back and see what happens. We have the outsourced R&D, and it'll take 5% of the funds that are incoming. So there's, like I said, negotiation. And then, of course, bailouts or grants. This one is run my space program without money, but then if I fail at leadership, then I failed at my R&D. So that'll be interesting. And to give you a little bit of background on myself, just to take a pause from the game, I am a project manager myself. I am passionate about space and rocketry. My hobby is to not only play games that have something to do with space technology, but I actively try to participate in outside activities. For example, I do have a son, and me and him and my daughter, we used to fly model rockets, And I used to get into the science with them. Of course, they're chemical rockets, very cheap ones, nothing expensive. But there is a place near my house. I shouldn't say near, but the fact that they will launch homemade rockets with different propulsion systems, different types of technology that are adapted from the true rocket systems of commercial aspects, and of course NASA and other European Space Agency. And they try to go as high as they can, or do a specific task while they're or try out a new technology, which I thought was very fascinating. I really want to get into it, and of course I just don't have the funds. It is expensive to do that. I'm looking forward to do that in the future, and with that, like I said, I love space. I want to have that ability to be on a team and launch a rocket into space so bad. I know what it takes to get it done. I have aerospace and I should say avionics experience, and safety, of course, is number one. You'll find here safety's not really number one. I'm going to try to consider it number one as far as the game, but as far as some of the realistic aspects, there is no limitations on oxygen for Kerbal. I didn't put that mod in. So there are considerations that I'll speak to, but the game won't take those considerations into account. So we'll come back to this screen. I may go through a couple more of these. I normally don't use these, although the recovery transponder fitting is really nice. It's a good return on investment, and your commitment, of course, as you bring your commitment up, it costs you more. And then the effect itself is bringing in the minimum vessel recovery, 10 to 15%, and then minus 10%. Now, the way SpaceX did this, they were ingenious. They said, why let the boosters go when we can recover them via a robotics guidance system to a platform? Awesome. Why not? These are the types of innovative ideas that I like to ponder, and that I can bring to a team as well. So let's see if we can mimic some of those things in Kerbal Space Program. I know we can. Let's see if we can do it the standard mods. Okay, so that was the administration building. Of course, I showed you the R&D, and it's pretty much all the buildings that are at this facility. Of course, we have the landing strip, which the landing pad and the landing strip, the runway, are at its base settings, meaning when you look at the actual landing pad or launch pad, you'll find that it's like a dirt pad. Let's go ahead and take a mission, and we'll see the first two that I always take: gather scientific data from Kerbal and launch our first vessel. That's the first ones you take. The first one that I clicked on was gather scientific data from Kerbal, and as you can see, we're basically trying to gather any data, but the funny part about Kerbal is we can recover or transmit any science experiment from Kerbal to achieve this goal, which is basically taking a crew report on the launch pad is good enough to satisfy this as a requirement. So we're going to do that. It's 1 science and 2 reputation, and you get a little bit of money. And if you do it within the 3 days, you get a little advance. So we're definitely taking that one. And then, of course, we're going to launch our first vessel. We can do both at the same time. What we're going to do here is literally just launch the vessel. So with the rockets, standard rockets, and we'll see that in a second, the standard rockets that we have are pretty easy just to lift off. And you'll see that it doesn't take too long to launch your first vessel. We're going to attempt to launch it and recover it. We will have a pilot or in the first one as an astronaut. It's not going to go very high, and we will be able to manipulate time, so when our parachute deploys, it'll come down a little bit faster. So once I have 2, which is my mission control maximum right now, we are going to go back to our vehicle assembly building, or our VAB. Our VAB is basically a hangar with Kerbals hanging around doing nothing. So let's give them a job to do. And the first thing I use, there's 2 here. We have the Orion reentry module, and we have the MK1 command pod. Both costed the same price. As you can see on the bottom, cost $615. The thing here is if you hit left click, you'll get a little bit more information. You'll be able to scroll over that information. Here's a real antenna. You have 1.5 dB. You have a lifting surface of a relative wing area of 0.35, which gives us the drag coefficient. And we have a reaction wheel, which means we're going to have an SAS. An SAS is a stabilization system, which means my rocket can go straight up without me piloting too much. We have electric charge. We will have lights in this. We also have a couple other things we want to do with the electric charge later on down the road, but the electric charge total is 50, and that includes the batteries that would be in the capsule. We can add extra batteries later. We can also add solar panels later, but right now we're at a technology level where we can't do that. So the crew report, collectible data, no. Rerunnable varies, and resettable, it varies. So when we collect this data, we're going to be able to have to bring it back to the surface to gather it, is what basically what it's saying. The collectible data itself means the pod, or the pod does not collect data itself. So and I'll show you a little bit on that. The micropropellant is very important. It's part of the RCS system, which I'm being very redundant on. RCS. When you use RCS, you're using puffs of air to guide your capsule. They become more effective the farther you go up, the less atmosphere you have, the more vacuum you have. So basically, they're really good in orbit or space. They're not as powerful within the atmosphere. So we always, I should say, I always check this one, and then you have you can, once you have it on the in the VAB itself, you can look at it. You have different controls. MechJeb is enabled, but in this you need a MechJeb module in order to actually take over the flight. We don't have one, so everything's manual. The reaction wheel is that gyroscope, essentially. And what happens with the gyroscope is you can turn it on or off. So you can say the reaction wheel is done by the SAS only, the pilot only, or normal, which means you can go back and forth between the pilot and SAS. You have a tech level. You have all RF bands, which you can change. In this is the RF band of choice for this one. Like I said, very low technology. We don't have much. We have the electric charge, which we can adjust if we wanted to. Micropropellant. In this, it just adds or subtracts the cost of the mission. Technically, I could reduce these, but it costs so little. I won't. And of course, the nice part about Kerbal is we have an instantaneous build cycle. So as I build it in here, it gets built. In the real world, of course, we're going to have milled parts. We're going to have specifications and negotiations with third-party vendors. We're going to have quality inspections. We're going to have destructive inspections, non-destructive inspections. There's a lot to an actual launch that would have to occur prior to even getting on site to build the parts. And as you build the parts, you're going to want to do a couple different things prior to installing that part on the satellite and or the rocket and or the command module. All right, so on this, we can configure the vessel naming, which we will right now. It's untitled spacecraft, and you have different schemes of color. We'll go total white on that. And as you can see, there's only 3, but as you get farther into the game, you'll be able to select more. All right, so we'll toggle that off. And over here on the left, we have all the different systems of a rocket. Again, our technology is only basic. And we do have a utility, which is the M16 parachute, or MK16 parachute. And basically it's, we have a deployable area, we have fully deployed area, and then we have, all right, so this is chutes deployed, but it's not open. We have fully deployed, which means it's open, which gives us the effective diameter. And then the maximum safe speed at deployment. All this information is very important to us because we want to know when we can deploy the chute without it ripping off. The approximate speed for this one is 264 meters a second. At full deployment, it will open completely at 1,000 meters. You can change this 1,000 meters, and I probably will. Well, 1,000 meters is pretty good. In later flights, I'll probably change this or manipulate this. And a semi-deployed minimum pressure at 0.04 atmospheres. This is when you get into different altitudes of landing zones. For example, sea level, you're at 1,000 meters. As you move up into the mountains, this semi-deployed minimum pressure becomes very much an important factor because 1,000 meters could be a mountain, ending your short landing cycle, or shortening it very, very much so. All right, so we're gonna just take this over and put it on. We're gonna right click, and as you can see, the minimum pressure and the altitude are set, so we don't have to worry about it. And you can pin this if you wanted to. I don't pin these, and they will be pinned as basically a HUD for you as the player to, or if you were to think of this as a mission control. Mission control is monitoring the systems of the spacecraft from their seat, and this is the data that they would be seeing or being available to them. And then you just take that off by unpinning it and left clicking. And of course, here's all my other controls. And a lot of these are tools that are really cool and really useful for later flights. This flight, not so much. Here's your contracts, and if you move these, once you move them to the launch pad, you'll see the if you achieve the goal for whichever contract that you're trying to go for. All right, and engineering report is really nice for later missions. Again, they kind of give you a little bit of craft stats, the amount of parts, and because it's an early technology, I can only go to 30. My mass of the craft is going to be very useful. Kerbal Engineer Redux 1.190. This is going to give you the thrust to weight ratio, and this is going to tell you whether you're able to orbit, essentially, break the gravity of the body that you're launching from. So your thrust has to be at least in Kerbal around 1.5 times to 2 times is where I'd like to be. If it's more than that, great, but you're also wasting fuel and wasting money, technically. So you want to be able to design for what you need, not necessarily over-engineering, but depending on what we see or what we do or how we see the mission, especially in later missions, I might want to have a reserve of fuel in order to do 1 or 2 maneuvers that I wasn't expecting. And that gives me a little bit more flexibility and error. If I'm in error, I'll be able to bring it back, a capsule back to land safely back on the planet, especially in orbit. All right, so this gives us a show severity design checklist, which is always nice. And of course, we have the, this is just a selector, so we don't worry about that. We have a Kerbal alarm clock, just so you can figure out what day it is, and mission clock essentially. I don't use that. We do have real antennas, so we have 3 nodes with 17 oculars and ground stations. I don't really use real antenna, just not yet. It's more of a future tech type of necessity. And of course, MechJeb comes up here, gives me my, right now it's going to give me my Delta V status. And for the game, currently, I do want to see this when I launch, just to see where I am on Delta V and see where my thrust to weight ratio is at any given time. And there I'm gonna make adjustments to each rocket. Now in Kerbal, you can, if you have an unsuccessful flight, you can go back to the vehicle assembly, or the launch pad. I will be doing that because it's basically a simulator, right? If this were real life, obviously I'd be crossing my T's and dotting my I's and dotting my lowercase j's. But here I can have a little bit of fun, kind of play around a little bit, do a little bit of more imagination, and see what I can build on. Now, when we do build this rocket, it's going to be with a flea. The flea is basically a solid fuel booster, as you can read, but its thrust is pretty good, actually, for an earlier rocket. Thrust in the vacuum always goes up, and then the engineering ISP. This will be mostly for vacuum use. I mean, you do have at sea level, AESL, but and that'll be for launch status, depending on what body or you're going to be launching from. So it gives you a little bit of blurb, a little bit of fun here, of, while considered by some to be little more than a trash bin full of boom, which is, it's basically solid fuel and an outlet, and capped, so the Kerbal doesn't perish from the heat and the explosion. So pretty funny stuff there. All right, so we have 3 parts, and we will start taking off here in a moment. The other aspect to this game that we have to consider, a lot of aspects, huh? It's true for everything, though. If you're in the space program or even in normal project management, you want to consider all types of feeds and stakeholders and concerns, and you want to drive to those challenges, overcome them, or assign a risk to them. You might not overcome a challenge, but you assign a risk low enough that you would deem acceptable. In those terms, though, as a project manager or a program manager, you want to reach out to all the stakeholders. You want to get their vision or their opinion on what the risk could be. Let them assign the number, and then you evaluate that and basically gather the team together and say, okay, based on everybody's feedback and level of risk, this is what I've come up with. And then you give them the explanation and see if that's acceptable for everybody, or if it's not acceptable, then go back and figure out what is acceptable, because some challenges you cannot overcome, which is fine. You just have to be able to mitigate them to a point where everybody is not only comfortable, but in a space program, you want to almost eliminate them. But at the same time, you know there's a level of risk. For example, I have a chemical burn that's going to happen for a certain amount of time. When I start this reaction, it's not going to stop. So the risk is, once you start it, you don't stop it. Now, is there ways to do that in real life? Maybe, perhaps. But in Kerbal, once you light this candle, it's lit. All right, so this area here is staging. So I always put the rocket stage in my first stage, and then my parachute stage in my second stage, or my 0 stage, as Kerbal likes to put it. So how we would do this in Kerbal is when I get to the launch pad, I'm going to use my WSD keys and spacebar essentially for solid fuel boosters. So as you see, when I hit the spacebar, it'll light, and then I'll use my WSD as a basic three-planar course adjustment, essentially. In this one, I'm going to go straight up and straight down, but as you'll see here in a second. So that's pretty much built for the first two missions. The first two missions aren't that grand. They will set you up for what you need. So what I could do here is set this up as a titled spacecraft of Science and Launch 1, and we'll just say to complete 2 missions. Actually, let's go to complete first 2 missions. And then we come over to the save button and save it. And then as we, since we want to launch, we come over to the launch button. As we get into more of the game, I'm not going to explain as much of the tools that I'm using, but I will be going to them and pointing them out. So here we have our altimeter. Of course, we're 69 meters above sea level. Here's our atmospheric gauge, which is basically a gauge that's going to allow us to know where we're near space, to the stratosphere, and then in orbit or in space. I'm going to bring this a little bit closer. You can see our flag flying is nondescript. And of course, I'm going to open this up, and there is a crew report button that I'm going to hit, and it's going to ask me what's their assessment of the launch pad right now. If I recover this, I get 1.5 science. If I transmit it, I get 1.5 science. Transmitting sometimes reduces the science. This is going to be very important in later launches, especially if I can't recover the spacecraft. I'm going to do everything or engineer everything as much as possible to recover the science and recover the spacecraft. As you see, it does have a data size, so each experiment is going to be higher in data. And then, of course, you have the 2 experiments. Once I hit the keep experiment, if I went back to it, it says, do you want to overwrite? I'm going to cancel out because there's no point. And as you can see, my electrical charge while my Kerbal is sitting on the launch pad in the spacecraft, we are using electrical charge. And that's technically to keep the spacecraft live and ready. And it also means that the Kerbal themselves will be alive. So right now, Klaus Fischer is my Kerbal. He's a pilot. I know that, but I'll show that in the next launch. So I have one of my criteria met, and that's to gather scientific data from Kerbal. Launch our first vessel is the second. I just turned on my RCS and my SAS. I don't really need my RCS, but it just habit. My SAS is going to allow the rocket to go straight up. So let's go ahead and light the candle. And I'm going to go straight up through the clouds. Notice my thrust to weight ratio is going up. Now it's 0 because I expended all my fuel. Now I'm just going up based off of the speed that I had gathered. I'm doing about 500 meters a second. And once I start to go down, actually, before I start to go down, I'm going to hit the parachute. It'll help with drag so I don't go too fast. And as you can see, I'm going to hit about 16,000 meters. Actually, probably a little bit more than that. So I'll go to that map view, zoom in, and about 21,000 is my expected. So once I'm in that 234 from my parachute, I just launched my parachute. So my staging, all of them are expended. And as you'll see, once I get to 0, We're going to flip, and they're going to come down pretty fast. So as they come down, and this would be a wild ride for anybody, this is where mission control holds their breath, essentially. Because as we're coming down, we're actually coming down pretty good. But the aerodynamics, even in Kerbal, will flip this this capsule to a over, so it actually the capsule's pointed to the ground, which is never a great thing. But as you can see, Klaus is pretty excited. And there goes my drag. Remember, we're not opened yet. We're gonna open around 1,000 meters, but the drag is gonna help slow me a little bit. And then hopefully, when we get down to a certain amount, which is 1,000 meters, we won't see how the drag is preventing us from going over 350. And now that we're getting into a little bit more atmosphere, we're getting a lot more drag, and the drag is actually going to allow us to slow down even more. And then once we get into 1,000 meters, we should be well in the parachute's green range in order to deploy fully. And it looks like we're going straight down, so we won't, well, we'll probably land in the buildings. I should have offset just a little bit. And there's your chute. Your chute's opened, and we'll come down pretty slow. We have 100 meters. Remember, our 69 was our launch pad, and we're gonna come in on the road heading into our Kerbal Space Center. Awesome. So, very successful launch. Still haven't achieved the goal of gather scientific data, and you won't until you recover the vessel. So once you recover the vessel, the computer does a little bit of math and gives you a mission summary. There's my data that I accrued from the gathering of the crew report. And the vessel survived the flight, which gives us another 5 science. That's usually a big thing with science. You want to recover the things that work. You don't get any science for things that don't. So parts, I do get parts back, which means I get an extra amount of funds. Of course, the solid fuel didn't come back with me. I expended it, so boom. That is always a cost. So I got 109,000 back from that, and of course I'm gonna get a little bit for the missions, and then the crew came back and he gained 1 experience. So the more experience you gain, total reputation is 19. So people were pretty happy about this. I think we're stoked back at mission control. I hit done, and I'm gonna go back to mission control, and now a lot more available products are open to me. Now, as we go up into the progress of the game, one of the things that we have to watch out for is we're going to have to be able to increase our max amount of active contracts, and we're going to have to build onto our launch pad, because we're going to need the extra endurance, if you will, the robustness of the launch pad to have heavier rockets and boosters and modules and capsules and all kinds of stuff. So that weight is going to be directly affecting the launch pad itself. Right now, we don't have much as far as weight we can do, but we always want to forward our scientific advancements. So escaping the atmosphere might be a mission I want to take, but I have to do a little bit more research. The flea at launch site, if I'm testing the flea, I get one research. I know I have the flea. I know how to do this. I'm going to perform a test, and I'm not going to even use fuel. And I'll show you why. What you're testing is the systems and the automation, right? So this is a great way. It's a non-destructive test that allows you to utilize real conditions in order to simulate whether or not that booster is going to be a proper fit for future missions. Now, I'm definitely going to take that. It's very easy. Now, some of these I want to take early, like Orbit Kerbal. I have 2 more days to decide, so I have to be careful. But what I want to do is do the easy scientific that gave me scientific renown and scientific points in order to continue developing on my research and development tree. So here, this one expires in 23 hours. They want the R10 hammer solid fuel booster flight into above your above Kerbal. Now that's kind of vague. It looks like the altitude is 61,000 to 68,000 feet or meters, excuse me, at a speed of 90 to 260. So this one's going to be a little bit more pilot controlled. I'm going to have to do a little bit more manipulation. It's going to take me longer for the design. So I know I can escape the atmosphere very quickly, but before we do that, we have to have the technology in order to develop it. So here we have basic rocketry. I have 16 scientific points to do. So we're going to look at what that technology bump gives me. And this will give me a couple of different things. And of course, the engineering will give me a decoupler. And decouplers are going to be important for one thing. To be able to come back down to be able to get up into the atmosphere and get up into space. Now, the other thing that's going to be very important for space travel, or at least getting that atmospheric test done, is a heat shield. And right now, the heat shield is going to be at the serviceability part, or survivability, excuse me. So if I do the engineering 101, definitely. If I pick the survivability, I'll have the heat shield, but I won't have the rocketry to get me up into to space. So I could probably I don't have enough for that anyway, so it kind of makes my decision fairly easy. I'm gonna get the rocketry that allows me to do that. All right, so that's the first episode of my series. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plan on doing at least one a week, and we'll fly missions every once in a while. And as I said, from a perspective of a project manager, right now we've successfully run 2 missions. We don't have anything in the tracking station currently. We just did our research and development. There's nothing in the admin building that I want to do just yet. There's no space planes that I need to build currently. And Mission Control has some missions that I should be taking. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the escape atmosphere, just so I have it. And I'll look for another one in order to get some science. What I might do is take Orbit Kerbal. And what that'll do is it'll fill one of my active contract slots, but I can also take some measurements via the thermometer I picked up and a crew report, and I can get a little bit more science, so I can get that survivability aspect. So, but right now my active contracts is 2. So my actives are testing the solid booster and escaping the atmosphere. So I'll take this, and we'll do that next time.